small till it ain't, till it ain't, till it ain't, till it ain't. I'm building up a wall till it breaks. She hated when I call and it's late. I don't wanna keep you waiting. I hope I never keep you waiting. She think I know it all, but I don't.
Welcome to this week's episode of The Mixtape with Scott. I am the host, Scott Cunningham. I'm a professor of economics at Baylor University in Waco, Texas. This is a podcast that is about the personal stories of living economists. And it is a podcast that through the telling or through the listening to people's personal stories, it is over time a kind of patchwork quilt consisting of several different narratives about the history of the profession over the last 50 years. And this week's guest is Maya Rossin-Slater. Maya is an associate professor at Stanford University in the School of Medicine in the Department of Health Policy. And Maya has had a very productive career in a very short period of time. Maya is one of these economists that probably when I was younger, I would have looked at her vita every day and just flagellated myself and said, why can't I be as good as her? Why is she so much better than me? Hate to even admit that I was tortured with jealousy for many, many years of wanting to be just like everybody else. And Maya would have absolutely been somebody like that. She's an astonishingly productive, impactful health economist. Focuses in her career is focused a lot on this cool intersection of the family and labor. And labor's probably my, I wouldn't call myself a labor economist, but labor is definitely a field that I just adore. And and that's part of what has always kind of drawn me to Maya's work is her work on things like family leave policies, maternity leave, things that might be affecting interventions in the labor market and its impact on the family. And I'm also very interested in the family because of my deep love of Gary Becker, as well as other people's work. And so Maya's just sort of in that cool spot intellectually for me of just how every idea that she seems to put down on paper is to me like really cool. And so in this interview, we're going to learn a lot about her life, and I don't want to take anything away from it. And I know people don't listen to the podcast to hear me ramble in the opening, but I do think that this is a great interview to share with people, especially students, maybe family, anybody, just to kind of hear a little bit more about, the life and the journey of Maya, and also to kind of hear a little bit more about, the how she's different in terms of how she approaches work and what makes work meaningful to her, both, like work generally, both in terms of the work, but also her family and also even friendships. All of those things kind of come up a lot if you listen closely in the background, but also just how these ideas came about to her. There were things that, as she was sharing with me, there was just things that she would share about these formative years, these formative events in her life. And I just thought to myself, you just never know as a faculty, you never know what's going to happen when you bring a student in to a part of the work that you do. The role of the mentor and the role of the advisor. It's just very difficult to even figure out like what the heck is going on with that. But I am convinced that the advisor is a big part of the scientific production function. And Maya is both an advisor and an advisee, and as we all are listening, have been in one of those two, or if not both of those positions in our life. And so it's cool to just kind of hear in the background the little things that really mattered that maybe you don't even know when you're doing them that they might matter that much. So let me turn it over to myself and Maya talking. But I wanted to say thank you from the bottom of my heart for tuning in and supporting the podcast. I really appreciate it. This is a thing that I just love doing. I love to meet people in this way and just hear their story. I love just to get out of my head and just connect with another person and them to be willing to share it and be willing to let me connect and let us connect. And so I get to do that. And it's neat to know that you guys get to hear a little bit more about this, about Maya and even me maybe. And so I really appreciate you tuning in, and I hope that you enjoy this interview, and I hope you have a great day and a great next 2 weeks. Well, it's a pleasure to have with me a guest. I've only gotten to speak with you one time in person, and so it's really nice to get to spend an hour talking to you. This is Maya Rossin-Slater at, well, actually, you tell me where you're from. For the sake of the listener, can you tell us your name and your title and who pays your paycheck?
Absolutely. So thanks so much for having me. My name is Maya Rossin-Slater. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Health Policy, and Stanford pays my paycheck.
Awesome, awesome. Okay, well, let's go ahead and get started. Before we get started, I wanted to do an icebreaker. What's a vacation that you've been on? It doesn't have to be one that you just did. It doesn't even have to be a super old one. It's just whatever. Doesn't have to be the best or the worst one. But you, every now and then, you've noticed that it'll pop in your mind.
Um, So I don't know if I would call this a vacation, but it's a trip that I took when I was a kid that definitely kind of pops into my mind at random points as I think about, also my own kids now and my childhood. And it's a trip, and I guess we'll get into this more, but I was born in Russia. And it's a trip that I took that was a train ride. It was a 7-day train ride from Moscow to Beijing, China. My grandfather is Chinese, and so my parents and I were traveling to visit my grandfather, and that was going to be my first time being in China and visiting like all of the family that lives there. And I think these days this it's like called this Trans-Siberian Express, and it's like been
Oh,
revamped to be fancy and cool and like this destination. Back then, when I was a kid, it was really kind of the cheapest mode of transportation.
ah,
And so it's a trip that we took. And 7 days in a little cabin with 4 people, my parents and I, and then their friend. And 7 days there, 7 days back. And we spent some number of weeks in China, and it was a really big formative experience that
oh, that sounds
definitely still remember. I
wonderful.
think I was about 6 years old at the
Oh,
time.
that sounds so cool. The train ride, sleeping in the train. You were sleeping in the like the train,
The little cots,
the
yep.
little things. Oh, that's so cool. What were you playing and doing while you're on that train ride?
I mean, again, like this is days before iPads or anything like
Yeah.
that. There was a lot of card games, reading.
Oh.
You would look out the window, you would walk out, outside in the different stops and look outside. And
Oh,
yeah, I don't know. I don't really remember. Now that I think about it, I'm like, oh my gosh. And my kids are 4 and 8, and I'm like, what would they do for
yeah.
7 days in this
Yeah.
contained space? But somehow I managed and we
Oh, that
managed.
sounds so fun. That's wow. So you grew how, but you don't have an accent. So how long did you live in Russia? You grew up there?
Yeah, so I was born in Russia in now called St. Petersburg. Back then it was called Leningrad. I
Oh.
moved to America when I was 10. So I hear that a lot of accent formation happens before the age of 12. So I
Mhm.
came right at that cutoff, such that many people say I don't necessarily have an accent, although if you listen carefully, maybe I do a little bit.
Oh, okay. Okay. What did your parents do for a living? Leningrad. Oh, wait, real quick. What's Leningrad? What? So Is it
The second,
is it Leningrad to you in your heart, or is it St. Petersburg?
no, I think of it as St. Petersburg now, which is like the name it's been known as since the Soviet Union fell apart.
Okay.
And just technically, when I was born in the 80s, it was still called Leningrad.
Uh-huh.
Um, and yes, well, my parents were physicists.
Oh,
So they were physicists working at like a research institute in St. Petersburg.
oh,
Um,
okay. They were not professors?
they were not professors. They were research scientists.
Oh, oh. Were they in the same field in physics?
Yeah,
Huh.
yeah, semiconductors. Don't ask
Semiconductor.
me too many more details, but the semiconductors.
Oh, how did they meet?
They met in college. Yeah, so they met very young. They got married. They were like 22 or something, which I think was kind of the norm for
Yeah.
their time and where they were living. They met in college, and then after college, they kind of continued their studies in
Mm.
physics and then began working as research scientists.
Oh, wow. So did you have any siblings?
No, only child.
Oh, you were an only child. Was that
Yeah.
common in Russia to have be like a
I
single
think so.
child?
I think so. At that time, it was quite common for families to just have one child. Many people that we knew around us also just had one child. So it was kind
Wow.
of the norm. When we came to America, I felt definitely was like definitely not the norm. Most
Huh.
families have like two
Huh.
or three kids.
Have you ever wondered why that is? Why Russia would have be so commonly one child back then?
I mean, I think this was a time of a fair amount of instability in Russia, like leading up to into the collapse of the Soviet Union, a lot of like economic uncertainty.
Hmm.
It's a big reason why we left. But
Hmm.
so I think all of that probably contributed, and maybe some cultural norms around it too. But
That was
that
why you
seems.
left? You were leaving because of the collapse?
So, the Soviet Union collapsed, and my parents' jobs as research scientists, like effectively no longer really could allow them to make a reasonable living in sort of
Mm.
the new economy. There was hyperinflation, like the
Mm.
stories I sometimes tell is like when I was a kid, I wanted to like save money to buy ice cream, and I would walk by like with my grandma by the ice cream shop, and it would go from like 9 rubles to like 18 rubles to 30 rubles to
You
40
remember
rubles
that? You
in a
remember
matter
that
of weeks.
happening?
And I never managed to buy the ice cream myself. I like ended up buying gum instead or something.
Right, right.
So the economy was very unstable and uncertain. And a lot of people that we knew, these are all mostly very highly educated professionals. A lot of them either tried to find ways to get out and leave, or kind of had to turn to like I don't know, more business oriented like endeavors where, at the time you really needed, I mean, maybe it's still true that today probably you needed to have like connections with like people in government and things like that. So, and my family didn't have that. Yeah, and then I think, one of the main mechanisms for moving to America at the time from Russia was through the Jewish refugee program. So my father is Jewish, and so through that, we were able to come to America as refugees.
So that would
And
have been
then,
what, fourth grade? Third grade?
yeah, so I came. It was in May, so we came, and it was the very end of what would be fourth grade for.
That's pretty fourth grade completing fourth grade, that's you're not like so little. You kind of
Mhm.
are.
Yeah, I was 10. Yeah.
So that might have been a little, that might have hurt a little. Was that a hard move?
Yeah, I mean, in hindsight, I think like in some ways it was easier for me to come as a 10-year-old than, it would have been if I came like as a teenager,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Um, but for sure, it was a big adjustment. I had learned English kind of in school and
Mm.
just a little bit back when I was in Russia, but it was all like through books and whatever. And like it was just such an experience, like being in like a classroom. Like I still remember like coming in on the very first day, it was like the end of fourth grade, and I got
Mm.
put into some classroom, and the first thing that we were doing, at least according to my memory, is a spelling test. And
Oh,
I was just
really?
like, I just didn't, I had no context for anybody. I couldn't understand anything. And so yeah, so it was definitely an adjustment. I didn't really, I picked it up quickly, but I by no means was fluent in the language. And obviously it was an adjustment culturally and all the different ways.
Well, so okay, what jobs do your parents get, and where do they end up where do y'all end up moving?
Yeah, so we moved to Mountain View, California, the Bay
Okay.
Area. Um, we did
Oh.
that because my parents had some friends that had moved just a year before that, and they had happened to come to Mountain View, California, and so we ended up in Mountain View, California. We rented a one-bedroom apartment, and my parents didn't have like jobs lined up or anything like
Mm.
that. So, I sometimes think about the fact that I study like safety net programs now in my research, and my family benefited from that. We came when it was actually we actually came. This is a random tidbit that's interesting for researchers. So, the welfare reform in 1996 restricted access to safety net programs for immigrants, and that took effect in August um, of that year, but we came like 3 months before that. And so
Wow.
we were able to, which like we did not know we would be part of a regression discontinuity.
Did you
But
write a paper have you written a paper on that?
no, I wish I could. There's no good data on like
Uh,
when people arrive. But if anyone knows of that data, I'd love to write that paper. But anyhow, so yeah, so we were on Medicaid, we were covered by Medicaid, we received food stamps benefits, things like that. My parents ended up, I mean, we were really fortunate. My parents were highly educated physicists that landed in, Silicon Valley, right ahead of like the tech boom.
mm.
So my dad ended up working and still works for like a company that basically makes lasers.
Oh.
He's been there for many years. And then my mom, she bounced around a lot of startups for about the first 10 years that we lived here, which was exciting, but also quite, I think, challenging.
Yeah,
And then she
sure.
ended up with a job as a patent agent
Mm.
for a law firm.
Mm.
So she's basically been there until now.
It's like
Yeah.
Einstein, physicist working at a patent thing, right? Isn't he? Uh, so what do you remember liking about California at the very beginning?
Oh gosh, I mean, just the climate was so different than what I was used to. I just like remember just seeing palm trees and the weather and just how beautiful and sunny it was. So that was definitely made an impression. Being close to the ocean,
Mm.
um, that all of that was made a really big impression.
So did you
But
live? Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, but then also just pretty quickly I started like to make friends at school and through various activities, and so I think that also like the community here had a big impact.
Well, what kind of when you're now like 11 or 12, not quite high school yet, what are you enjoying doing? What's like your favorite? What could I have found you doing like, on the weekend?
When I was 11 or 12. Well, the primary like extracurricular activity that I got involved in pretty soon after I came to America was dance. So I did international folk dancing as part of this group that was all made up of almost entirely like immigrants from the former Soviet Union.
Mm.
And so, so that kind of made up a lot of my activity outside of school for until I graduated high school. So you may have found me doing some kind of dance performance Otherwise, I spent a lot of time like, with my family. We would, especially in those early years, we did a lot of exploring around on weekends, like go to the beach or, San Francisco, like kind of playing tourist, basically,
Yeah.
um, things like that.
Okay. Wait, so what's folk dancing? What is that? Is that a regional? Is that like a it's like a
Yeah, it was like, we had Russian folk dance, Caribbean dance,
Mhm.
Moldovan dance, like just different Italian dance, like different cultural um, dances with sort of the costumes and all of that.
What'd you love about that?
Well, I've always liked kind of dancing, performing, that kind of stuff. And I kind of like doing it as part of a group. Like I think
Mm,
I get too nervous to like do things like that on my own, but I think being part of a group was fun for me.
mm,
And it was a pretty tight-knit community.
mm.
So a lot of my friends during childhood were through that. But it was a little bit separate also. Like I also had friends through school. But it was sort of the separate world that I kind of inhabited, outside.
Oh, okay. Well, so what did you want to be when you grew up before high school?
Question. Um, so I guess, before high school, I think I wasn't quite sure. Again, coming from like a sort of immigrant family, like I think my parents hoped I would be like a doctor or an engineer or scientist or something like that.
Mhm.
I wasn't so sure about that. I convinced myself that I was like too afraid of blood, so I didn't want to be a doctor.
Mm.
Um, yeah, now in hindsight, I'm not sure that that should have been such a big deciding factor, but I decided I didn't want to be a doctor. But then pretty soon, both in middle school and in high school, I participated in the newspaper,
Oh,
and got pretty involved in the high school newspaper. I was like features editor, and decided I wanted to be a journalist. So if you'd asked
oh.
me in high school what I wanted to be, I would have told you I wanted to be a journalist.
You gained real expertise at the English language really fast then.
Yeah, I liked exactly. I picked up English and then I liked writing. I especially liked kind of human interest type of writing,
Mm.
features. So I liked writing about people. And yeah, and I just thought it was super fun. It was fun to be a part of the newspaper. A lot of my closest like friends from high school were through the newspaper.
Mm.
And yeah, I thought it was something that I wanted to do. At the same time, I sort of recognized that it was not exactly probably the most financially kind of sound career that I could pick. And I think I felt some questions about that from my family.
Mm. It's funny that I haven't really ever thought this out loud, but the high school newspaper and the college newspaper always seems like, and even newspapers seem like intensely communal. Was it like
Yeah,
you were very, it was like very much like you were friends with all these people?
yeah. Well, we spent a lot of time together. We had these like late nights, as we called them, because the ahead of the deadline of when the newspaper went to print to the like actual printer, we would have these evenings where we would work together putting together the newspaper,
Mm.
and we would order food, and it was fun to be at school like after hours and working on this together. So we had a lot of fun. And yeah, I became friends with, still to this day, I'm friends with some of the people that I got close to through that
Yeah.
experience.
Yeah. So if I could have like by your senior year, if I could have like eavesdropped in the teachers lounge and and your name comes up and they're like Maya, Maya, and then they're talking about you, what would they have said? Oh, she's this kind of person. What would they have said about you, you think?
Oh gosh, that's a funny question. I mean, I was a good student. I think I was. A friend of mine told me she's like, you've always been good at figuring out like what the teacher wants you to do. So I was like good at like figuring it out in terms of like, okay, we have to write this paper, do this project, and like this is what you do to get a good grade. And so, so I was a good student.
Mm,
I was kind of quiet. I was pretty shy.
mm.
So I wasn't like super, active or vocal in class. But I did my work. I don't think I stood out like too much. I had, my friends and that's kind of it. Yeah.
Well, so you're graduating, but like it sounds like for a little bit you actually did think about journalism. You were like, but
I
then at
did.
some
I
point it
did.
changes.
I even like I remember at the time, in that time period when you're kind of visiting colleges, I had visited, I'd gotten some scholarship to USC, which has like a really fantastic journalism school.
Mm,
So I remember like I took a trip down there as part of the scholarship program, and like visited the journalism school and sort of thought about it. But I think I ended up getting into and going to UC Berkeley for college. And I think it was kind of like in the summer between high school and college, as I was thinking about like what should I major in and kind of what thinking about classes that I'm going to be taking. And somehow I think economics, I ended up majoring in economics, and I knew nothing about economics, honestly. Like we didn't have economics in my high school. So I really did not know really what it was at all.
mm,
But it felt somehow like this middle ground between, my parents were like, maybe you should do, chemistry or biology or like some kind of science. And I was
mm.
like, I want to do journalism. And somehow economics, maybe because they thought it was kind of like business oriented, um, felt like this middle ground that was something that my family felt like, okay, this seems like a sensible choice.
Yeah,
And I felt like, okay, maybe I'll try it.
yeah.
Although again, I really did not know what economics was at that time.
Well, so you get to Berkeley, and does it feel different to be at Berkeley since you're like you grew up around there, or does it feel just really magical and kind of cool and different?
Yeah, so Berkeley's maybe about an hour, a little over an hour drive from Mountain View where I lived. And I didn't spend like a lot of time over there, so it did feel, different, and it felt sort of sufficiently far. That being said, I actually only applied to schools in California. I didn't apply to
Oh,
any schools outside of California. I didn't
mm,
want to go that far away from home. It's interesting. Like I think I had a lot of friends who were like, "Oh, I want to go, far away to a different state." And I don't know. I think it's something about like my family's so kind of international and spread out around the world,
sure, sure.
that there's a part of me that wanted to be not too far away,
Yeah,
from my family. So anyhow, so Berkeley seemed like a great option.
yeah,
I was excited to get in, obviously, and it like felt like it fit with just what I wanted out of
yeah.
college. But yeah, and then when I got there, yeah, of course, it was different in all the ways that I think going to college is different for many kids, like living in the dorms and all of that. But it felt like it wasn't like so far
Yeah.
from what I knew.
So when do you take an economics class?
I think took like principles of econ in like that fall, like first semester. I
But
will say I
you
also
didn't
took.
major. You hadn't picked a major yet. You just
No, but you had to take it to declare,
yeah.
So it was like I was taking the prerequisites.
But you
Um,
already knew. You already had sorted into econ the second you got
Well,
there.
I think I was trying to take, like, I'd sort of decided I'm going to try to do an econ major, kind of like as I was headed to Berkeley. And
Oh,
so, I looked at what do you need to do to become a major, to get a major in economics, and like principles of economics was like the first
right,
course. And so
right.
I signed up for it that first fall semester. You also had to do some math. And I remember taking like the calculus, like the first calculus course at Berkeley, and being like completely just like feeling like I'm way over my head, like what is going on? Because it felt like it was at a such different level than what I was used to in
Mm,
high school. So that was
mm.
definitely like
Okay,
a bit
I
of a.
missed this. Where in high school are you hearing about economics if they have no econ in your high school and your parents are
I
studying?
wasn't. I literally knew nothing about economics. So that summer between high school and college, I like have this memory of looking at like a course, like a physical course catalog,
Yeah.
and kind of just flipping through it and seeing like what are the different majors at Berkeley and what are the different courses you could take. And economics was there. And I was like, huh, what is this? Like, and I just kind of like looked at it. And again, like, I sort of like talked to my family, and my parents were like, oh, that sounds interesting. Like, like economics, business, finance, that kind of stuff. And I was like, all right, I guess I'll try it.
Huh.
And that was kind of it.
Did you have when you were getting, like that little pivotal, well, actually, when you think back now, because so much of your Vita, I mean, it is very focused on public policy, and obviously economists have for since day one always been interested in public policy, but not everybody is interested in public policy outside of econ. So does that surprise, does that seem like a natural thing? Like you actually kind of were always a little bit interested in policy?
Oh yeah. So I've always kind of been interested in like issues related to inequality and kind of poverty. I did a lot of like I tutored kids in East Palo Alto when I was in high school. Like I did a lot of like work and sort of was interested in issues related to like disadvantaged groups and sort of thinking about solutions, kind of a idealistic high school student, I guess. Um, and but I did not really make the connection with economics, to be honest. Like again, it was not like a super deeply thought out decision to major in economics. It was kind of like, all right, I'll just try this.
Hmm.
And for those first 2 years in college, I was just taking like, principles, intermediate micro, intermediate macro, all of that, and like other like prerequisite courses.
Yeah.
I can't say that I was like that enthralled. I was kind of like, all right, like I'm good at this because I'm decent at math and like I was getting good grades in these classes, but I was definitely not like, oh wow, like this is just what I want to be doing forever.
Yeah.
And then in my junior year at Berkeley, I took a development economics class with Ted McGill, who's still
Oh,
at Berkeley.
yeah.
And he teaches this really amazing, like, introduction to development economics course for undergrads. It was pretty
Mm,
popular. And that was really like an eye-opening experience for me because it was suddenly like, oh, wow, you can sort of think about all of these issues that I'm interested in and kind of want to do something about, like poverty, health, inequality, all these things that I kind of thought were like in the realm of sociology. Like that's kind of how I had bucketed it in my own brain.
yeah.
And I was like, oh, wow, economics does this too.
Mm,
So that was kind of like my first taste of like, huh, economics is like way broader than kind of like utility maximization that we were doing in intermediate micro.
right.
So that was really the first time that kind of came together for me.
Okay, yeah. All right. So what did so then it goes from, because it's kind of funny, you had this like real pragmatic approach to picking. You were like, I want to make money, or I've got to be able to have a career, but then something kind of sparks in that Miguel's class. Is that right? It's
Mm.
like something intellectual kind of, or something.
Yeah, exactly. It suddenly became like, oh wow, this is like way broader than I kind of understood it to be until
Mm-hmm. Hmm.
and so that was cool. And then I signed up. My other kind of really formative experience in college was I signed up to do the undergraduate research assistantship program that Berkeley had. And the mentor that I ended up with was Stefano Dellavina,
Oh,
uh, still there. And he was just fantastic. And he had a group of us. Um, I remember one of the things that we did was he at the time was working on this paper about the impacts of like violence in movies on
yeah.
crime.
Yep.
UJ paper. And so our task for the undergrad RAs was like to put
To
together
put it
all
all
the
together.
data on these
Like,
movies. And
yeah,
like,
like the
not that
box
I wasn't
office
watching any
mojo.
movies, but
Yeah.
it was like putting together the summaries and the reviews and like
Oh,
whatever.
yeah.
Um,
You
so
were
that was
you
also
were the RA
good.
on that paper?
I was an undergrad RA on that paper. Yeah.
Oh, well, you're
There's
going to
quite a
like
few of us.
a few of you. You like going to Box Office Mojo and you're putting in daily revenue or something? Is that what you're?
No, I actually like I don't like violent movies myself, so I didn't actually watch any of these movies.
Yeah, sure.
But I did, go on like IMDb and whatever like
Yeah,
websites to like
yeah.
figure out what they were about and all of
Right,
that.
right.
So that was really
Oh,
eye-opening. I was like,
would
wow,
you?
this is also economics.
Oh, so now you're like your brain's kind of changing about. So what do you start at this point? Then what are you starting to say economics is in your mind? What are you thinking it is for the first time?
Yeah, so I think at this point I was still like wasn't sure what I wanted to do after college. I signed up to do the honors thesis in my senior year, and so it was kind of, I wanted to try out research, but I still kind of wasn't sure. I knew, this was like pre-financial crisis, so a
Yeah.
lot of my classmates were going into like consulting, investment banking, that kind of stuff, and I knew I did not want to do that.
How
Like I
come?
was pretty clear. It just didn't sound exciting, interesting to me. It didn't appeal to me. I guess I still wanted to do something that felt meaningful in the world, and
Hmm.
I knew that I didn't want to do that. So I was pretty
Hmm.
clear on that. I wasn't sure what I would do instead. I like briefly remember thinking about like law school or something like that. Pretty quickly realized like that costs a lot of money.
Hmm.
And then honestly, it was really just the realization that economics PhD programs pay you to go to them, whereas like law school, you have to pay to go to them.
Yeah.
And that was kind of like major factor. I was like, huh, I could go to grad school for econ, they'll pay me, like maybe this is what I'll just do.
Hmm.
And again, I think I look today and people are so like thoughtful and prepared in terms of making these big decisions about going to econ grad school. And I just like look back at myself and I'm like, I don't think I like thought about it that deeply. Like I was just kind of like, all right, well, I guess I'll just apply to PhD programs
Hmm.
in economics. And that was it.
Did you have any role models at this time? Like people have you ever, well, actually, two questions. First of all, are you the kind of person that has ever sort of like had people that you like look up to? And I'm curious, and if you did, was there someone that like doesn't have to have been a teacher, but just someone in your life at that end of Berkeley that you just kind of did admire like a role model?
That's a great question. I do have people I look up to, but I think I didn't meet them until after Berkeley. Like in Berkeley, the classes were mostly so big, so that we didn't have a lot of like interaction with the faculty. Outside
Mhm.
of like these things, like I did the undergrad research program with Stefano, and I really, really like admired him and benefited from that. But beyond that, like. I didn't have that much interaction with faculty. Another thing is that at the time, I don't think I had in my upper classes, so there's very few women who were teaching economics at Berkeley at the time. Claire Brown
Yeah.
taught principles of economics. So I did take that one.
Oh.
That was really cool. Um, but beyond that, I like can't recall that I had any female uh, professors in
Mhm.
economics during that time. So to your question about role model, I mean, it's not that role models necessarily have to be the same gender, but sometimes it helps to see someone who kind of looks like you in those roles. And there wasn't really that many people.
Well, how did that
Um,
feel? Did you even notice? Was that just normal? Or did
Yeah,
you feel something?
honestly, I don't think I thought about it like that much.
Yeah.
It didn't really cross my mind. And it's only in hindsight that I think about that. But
Yeah.
at the time, it was just what was normal. Like I had a really close friend of mine was majoring in physics, and she, they even had, I think, even fewer women in physics
Mm.
at the time. So Like it didn't seem abnormal somehow. I just
Mm,
felt like that's what it is. But and then when I was applying to grad school, and I didn't kind of know much about any grad schools, but I do remember like looking at the website of Columbia's PhD program, and Janet Currie was like department chair at the time, and I was like, oh wow, and like I just remember looking at her website and I was like, oh, this is really cool. Like
yeah.
I didn't realize like people like this existed in the profession.
Mm. So these upper now, okay, this is interesting. So Ted's class is clearly going to be very empirical,
It
right?
was, yeah. I remember he did all his like things about like malaria
Right.
and books and like all these, a lot of RCT.
And so even
Uh,
even Della Vena's project is extremely empirical. So
yeah,
when you're thinking about economics, it's as is it true? Like when you're thinking about economics, you're thinking about empirical work already.
yes, absolutely. Definitely was much more interested in and kind of just naturally, I think, attracted to empirical work
Mm.
from the beginning.
Is that how the
I just didn't
stats
know.
part even comes in? You've got this double major in stats. Is that
Yeah,
why
yeah,
that is
kind
there?
of. But I think I was taking stats classes. I think at some point I realized I needed like two or three more in order to get the double major in it, so I just did it.
Mm.
Um, so it was one of those things where, again, like I didn't think that deeply about it, but it was I was already taking a bunch of stats classes. I think some of them were kind of like electives for the econ major.
Hmm.
So I just decided why not get the second major
Yeah.
in that.
Yeah. So, I mean, so I actually did not, I mean, I knew you had co-authored with Janet Currie, but I actually did not know that she was at Columbia. So that would have been between UCLA and Princeton. She's at Columbia.
That's right. Yeah. So
Oh,
I started in 2008 at Columbia, and she was there and she was department chair. And then I think she left. Well, you can probably look up her CV, but she left, I think it was during my fourth year.
oh, okay. Okay. So you get to Columbia. So that's is that as far east did you, because your home had been California for a long, long time. Was that
Mhm.
nervous? Were you nervous about that?
Oh, yeah. So I was choosing between the kind of like the top three places that I'd gotten into were Columbia, Berkeley, and Stanford.
Mm,
Um, I thought about Berkeley, but part of me was just like, I want something different, right? Like, I just didn't want to stay in the same place. And all my friends were like going on to different places. So, kind of wanted to just go somewhere else. Thought about Stanford, but it was almost like it was too close to home.
that's
And
closer
then
to home. Palo Alto's like super close to where your parents
yeah,
live.
exactly. Yeah.
Mm,
And then, so New York seemed really exciting. I'd
yeah.
never spent much time there. My partner, now husband, at the time, he was like really gung-ho about moving to New York City. He was like,
Yeah.
this will be such an adventure.
Yeah.
We'll go to New York City. And so we just decided to go for it.
Where'd you end up living? Where did you and him end up living in New York City?
We lived in grad student housing, like a
Okay.
student apartment that was, just a few blocks away from
Oh,
campus.
okay. Okay. Wait, so remind me again, where is Columbia in the city? What are you close to?
It's like Upper West Side,
Okay.
um, sort of the north part of Upper West Side, and Harlem is kind of on the other side.
Oh, okay. Okay. So what's first year like at Columbia? What are you
First year was
taking?
hard.
It was hard. Who's teaching
It
your,
was really hard. I think, this is probably true for lots of people, but, I went straight from undergrad.
yeah.
I remember looking around and seeing classmates who had like master's degrees in math from like Paris, something, something, and
Mm,
just felt woefully underprepared.
mm,
Um, I was one of five, maybe six women in a cohort of, 22, 23.
mm.
So terrible, but also definitely not equal.
Did you feel
And I
that?
just,
Was that something that felt salient that you
it
were
did,
now?
it did. Yeah, I think so. Also in part because a few of the women actually left partway through the program. So there was just a few of us that were left.
Mm,
And so I do remember kind of noticing that. But yeah, so that first year definitely was hard. I felt like I was like, what did I get myself into?
yeah,
Definitely remember thinking that. But I think there was something in me that was like, okay, let me just see if I can get through this and see if like it'll be different afterwards. And it
yeah,
was, right?
yeah.
So
Who's teaching your micro and macro and econometrics that first year?
like, oh my goodness. I did not prepare answers to that question. So Kiapori definitely
Oh,
taught micro.
mm.
Um, I'm gonna blank on the name. Paulo. I don't remember the
Well,
names
so
of all of them.
you end up focusing on the family. Are you interacting with Kapori very much during that?
Not definitely not during the first year. Like in the
Yeah.
first year, it was just, all courses, just try to survive, really, trying to like not
Mhm.
drown by the problem sets,
Yeah, right.
try to survive the exam. So first year, that's all I'm doing. But the thing that kind of got me started on the track that I ended up on was, as we're in like spring of the first year, we're thinking about what should we do like the summer, right? What kind, people are saying you should do like some kind of RA position, research assistant position. And my classmate and friend, Corinne Lowe, who's now professor at Wharton, she was like, you should just email Janet and see if she has any RA opportunities. And I was like, oh my gosh, like she's the chair of the department. Like she's so busy. Like, I'm just a first year. What is she gonna say? But I did.
Mhm.
I just sent her an email and she was so, gracious and responded very quickly and invited me to like her office, her big chair's office. And she said, you know what? I actually do have something, which is at the time she was working on her handbook chapter of labor economics, the human capital development before age five chapter,
Mm,
that I think was published in 2011 with
mm.
Doug Almond.
Okay.
And they needed an RA to do their lit reviews. So
Oh,
spent that summer making Excel tables of literature review of like hundreds of papers on kind of all the things that affect, outcomes before age five, and then sort of the consequences of stuff happening before age five
wow.
on people's long-run outcomes.
You basically become like an expert. It's like
That
you're
summer
getting
forced
like
me to become a little bit of an expert just because
yeah,
that was the job.
right,
Um,
right. Right.
yeah.
Did you come up, so what kind of thing happens to you in that experience that's like kind of a turn, or is there like a turning point or
Yeah, I
something?
mean, I think it was super helpful for me in terms of really kickstarting idea generation in the
Mm,
sense of like I think I'm the type of person that struggles with just like, just be creative, like think of ideas, in the shower or like walking around or like I'm also I think, sometimes people say like they just like naturally think about like economics in the real world and like I don't think I do that. Like I don't
mm,
think I have that kind of mindset like naturally. And so going through an exercise like that where I literally, I had, all these tabs for like different like the effects of income on infant health, the effects of like Medicaid on this and that. And so it kind of helped me visualize the research literature at that time. It also helped me understand like where the gaps were in like a very sort of systematic way, which
mm,
I think worked well for my brain. And so that, that experience was really formative in the sense that I started immediately seeing like, oh, we don't have good research on X or Y, and started thinking, okay, could I do something here? Is there data for this? So it really kind of got me thinking about research ideas in a way that I don't think I would have been able to had I not been forced to sit
yeah.
down and kind of read a whole literature base.
Is family leave policies a hole in the literature that you notice?
Yeah, at the time it was. It
Huh.
was. There really wasn't a whole lot on family leave. I mean, it sounds crazy to say now in 2024 where there's, hundreds of studies on family leave, but at the time there wasn't a whole lot happening
Huh.
in the family leave space, especially in economics.
Huh. Had Janet noticed that also? Was that like something that people were talking about, or were you noticing it?
No, I mean, I think so. I became Janet's RA for my second year. So that got me out of TAing for the second year. And so I was just RAing for her. And as part of that, like I did a lot of like data work with birth records data because she was working a lot with birth records data at the time. And I was, part of the job, I guess, was to just try to come up with ideas, right? And I came up with a bunch, and many of them sort of didn't go anywhere. But family leave was one that I'd come up with. And I remember I kind of have this memory of like going into a meeting. Janet would have like weekly meetings with all of her RAs. It was remarkable, all of her students.
Mm.
So I had see her very regularly. And you felt like you had to like come prepared with something every time. And so I remember coming in and saying like, I've been thinking about like one policy that I feel like I haven't seen much on is like family medical leave and etc. And she was like, huh, that's really interesting. Like I also feel like there's not a whole lot of this in
Mm.
economics. And there's a professor, Jane Woldfogel, who's at the School of Social Work at
Yeah.
Columbia. And so she put me in touch with her because she still is an expert on family leave. But she was, really an early expert at that time. She was really one of the only people that had written papers on family leave. So I talked to her and she thought it was interesting, but she was sort of thinking about these issues through like the lens of impacts on labor market outcomes
She
and
was.
reviews. Yes,
You end
exactly.
up doing that too, though.
Yeah, so my first paper was on infant health.
Mm.
And that was kind of the combination of thinking about family leave and the fact that I was working with birth records data.
Right.
Um, and then that was the Family Medical Leave Act. And then I teamed up with Jane and Chris Room, who was one of her frequent collaborators, to do a study on California's paid leave program, which was quite new
Mm.
at the time, right? So it only went into effect in 2004. And there really wasn't a lot of research on it. And
Mm.
so that's how I began doing that.
Oh, you write so many papers on family leave at the beginning. So there must have been, I mean, are you just doing one after another, or did you just kind of see like a map of like, I'm going to be able to write my way to, deep into my career?
Yeah, I don't know how, like, I don't know that I saw a map. I don't think I can honestly say that. But it was one thing kind of led to another, as I developed expertise on it, as I learned more and more about these policies, as I sort of did more research, trying to, look at their impacts, it became natural to kind of keep working in that area, just because it felt like there were still more questions that weren't answered yet. So it all kind of built on itself, but I don't know that I sort of immediately saw from the very beginning
Yeah.
that that's where I would go.
So it's this 2011 Journal of Health. That's your job market paper? The effects of
No,
maternity
it's
leave?
not. That was
Oh,
my
it's not?
second year. Hmm. No, so that was my second year paper.
Oh,
Because I graduated in 2013.
yep.
Um,
Oh,
and
yeah.
so
2011. Oh, you published that as a grad student,
I did, yeah.
solo authored. Wow, that's cool.
Yeah,
Oh,
thanks.
that's not common.
Um,
I mean, does seem like that's great. That's cool. Okay, so what was your job market paper?
my job market paper
I'm like looking at your
was
Vita
a
right
little
now.
different. What's that?
I just like I'm looking at your Vita on this piece
Oh
on
yeah,
the
no,
computer.
that's fine. So my job market paper was a little bit different, and it was sort of this, I think, interesting combination of, thinking about like what hasn't been done yet, and kind of like what the data are out there, and then kind of blending it all together. So my job market paper is the one that's called "Signing Up New Fathers: Do Paternity Establishment Initiatives Increase Marriage, Parental Investment, and Child Well-Being?"
Oh,
Um,
that
and
that's a long title.
it is, I know. Um, And that paper was, I obviously spent a tremendous amount of time on this paper.
Yeah.
The idea came to me again. It was just one of those things where I was trying to think outside the box a little bit in terms of like what hasn't yet been done
Mm,
in understanding like family behavior and family dynamics. The actual idea came to me because I was working a lot with birth records data.
mm.
And I just noticed that like father information was missing, in a large share of records. And then that got me thinking, okay, like, so what is the process anyways by like how father information gets on it, especially, in situations where the parents are not married.
Right.
And then that led me down the path of like, oh, there's these like paternity establishment rules and policies. And then that led me to, oh, and they are different across states in terms of, over the 90s, there's this big shift in terms of making paternity establishment a lot easier and simpler for families in an effort to increase like father involvement and engagement. And then that led me down this path of like trying to collect information on these policies because they weren't, I had to kind of go state by state to try to figure out when these programs were implemented.
What's a
Um,
paternity establishment? Are you saying
yes,
basically there's some frictions with putting the father's name on the birth
yeah.
record?
So okay, so in like the 1980s, um, in order for like if the two parents are not married at the time of birth, in order for the mom to actually receive child support from the father, I mean, and I'm going to use this language because that's the norm, doesn't mean that it always goes in this direction, but in order for the mother to receive child support from the father, you had to have legally established paternity. As a result of legally establishing paternity, so there's two things that happen. One is that then the family becomes eligible for kind of formal child support agreements, and the father gains rights to their child in terms of like having a right over, various decisions about the child's life, like visitation, all of these things, right? And in the 1980s, in order to do that, you basically had to go to court. Um, DNA testing was often involved. It was a pretty burdensome process, and many
Wow.
families just didn't do it. And
Mm.
then in the 90s, lots of states implemented what are called in-hospital voluntary paternity establishment programs. And what this is that just at the time of the birth at the hospital, the families just get a form that if both parents are present at the birth, they can just sign it and say we voluntarily establish paternity.
I this whole time thought that the missing father name meant the father was missing. Like
Well,
I thought it meant like he's not involved, but that's not accurate?
the missing father,
Oh, it
so
can mean that.
before kind of these programs were in place, basically you could only have the father's information in there if paternity was legally established.
Oh, got it.
Uh, with these programs in place, all of that just became so much easier because it just happened at the time of the birth. You didn't have to go to court. You didn't have to get like
Oh,
DNA
yeah.
testing. If both parents agreed, like this is the mother and father, we just sign and then we move on. And that allows for families to do things like establish child support agreements,
Oh,
visitation, all kinds of other sort of
oh, sure. Because then it's like you are the father because we agreed that this was the paternity on day one.
yeah,
What's your
exactly.
outcome? What are you looking at the effect of this on?
Yeah, so I think that sort of the most important outcome that I studied that then led me to look at other outcomes was actually parental marriage. And marriage specifically post childbirth. So sort of take the set
Mm,
of families that are not married at the time of childbirth, and then some share of those families, the parents will get married, let's say by the time the child is 5 years old.
mm.
And what I found is that like when you have these programs in place, paternity establishments go up a ton, right? Like by a huge amount.
Yeah,
But actually parental marriage rates go down.
really?
Right. So it's sort of the way that I thought about it was that this is offering this sort of intermediate option in terms of a relationship contract between like marriage and nothing, right?
Are you
And so
serious? Wow.
as you make that intermediate option easier and less costly for families, you're going to draw in families from both sort of ends of that distribution. And that's going to be especially true if like they were going to be like marginal marriages, right?
Marginal
So
marriages,
where
right. Right. They're substituting out of marriage, counterfactually out of marriage because they have established paternity.
exactly.
Were
So
you
it became
surprised by that result?
I think, I didn't know what to expect. I sort of first, I think, went into this project with a much more kind of basic framework of like, okay, these programs exist. How does this affect like child outcomes? I was kind of mostly interested in child well-being.
Hmm.
But then when I found this result on marriage, because I was looking at a range of outcomes, um, that was kind of interesting because it was like, it's not so simple, right? Because now you have kind of potentially opposing effects on what's going on in the family. Like on the one hand,
Hmm.
you know, maybe marriages that wouldn't have been that great for the family or the kid are no longer happening. But on the other hand, because paternity is, the dad is maybe not living with the child, right? If it's just paternity establishment and not marriage, then maybe the dad's less involved and like things like that.
Wow.
And so on net, like actually the effects on child outcomes are mostly null. But there was things like, for example, kids were less likely to be covered by private health insurance, and that's maybe due to like, they would have been on their
Oh,
dad's insurance and now they're not.
oh, wow. That must have been an exciting project.
Yeah, I liked doing it a lot for sure. I learned a ton. And it was, it also forced me to like write a model, which is
Yeah.
not something that I regularly do, but everybody kept telling me like, you need to write a model to think about all of this. It
Mm.
ended up anyways in the appendix of the published paper, but
Where did you
um, it,
publish it?
it was published in AJ Applied.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I was kind of going up. Okay, I think I saw it. Wow, that's cool. That's a great project. Uh, and I'm going to be thinking about it because I'm going to see if I can't anticipate your model a little bit because that's not what I was expecting. Huh. Well, so
Yeah.
I've talked to you for a long time and I didn't even get to your job, but you end up going to San Diego and you just stay there for a little bit. You end up there for
Santa
like,
Barbara. Yeah.
oh, it's
Santa
Santa
Barbara.
Barbara.
That's
Oh,
okay.
okay.
Similar climate.
And then you go to
Yeah,
Stanford. But you
that's
were
right.
in the econ department at Santa Barbara, but then when we started, you said, where did you, you're not in the econ department at Stanford. You said something else.
I'm in the Department of Health Policy.
Health
Yes.
policy. Okay. Okay. Well, so what's been the big difference between Santa Barbara and at Stanford in terms of like the environment?
Yeah, lots of differences. I mean, I was so lucky to land at UC Santa Barbara as my first job. Like, I always think that and say that it is one of the most supportive, wonderful department. I mean, living in Santa Barbara is magical, but also just the department itself and the people there, the faculty there
Hmm.
were just incredibly supportive. And it was a really, really great environment for me to start my career.
Hmm.
Um, I moved to Stanford after 4 years, when sort of the opportunity came about. Part of it was just like a personal decision to be closer to family,
Yeah.
for my husband and I.
Hmm.
But it was also exciting to think about being in a interdisciplinary department.
Yeah.
So that's not, something that I had experienced in either obviously my grad school training or in my first job. And it was both exciting and I think a little bit nerve-wracking. I didn't really know what to expect in terms of things like, what are the tenure expectations
Yeah.
for an economist in an interdisciplinary department in a school of medicine? What's great, part of our job here is grant writing. We're like partially soft money, right? So we have a hard money component, but we
Hmm.
are expected to write grants and like
Hmm.
big like NIH grants. And I didn't have very much actually any experience with that prior to coming
Hmm.
here. So learning all of that, learning what it's like to be a health economist in a world in which, not everybody speaks the same language as me, right?
Yeah.
Because people come from different fields and disciplines and having students that, you know, are also in this interdisciplinary department. But overall, I think it's been really positive. I've learned a lot being in an interdisciplinary environment that I think I wouldn't have had
Hmm.
always just been in econ. And I still feel like I really retain my economist identity,
Mm.
in the sense that I still, most of the work that I do is really just econ.
Yeah,
Um,
totally.
and so I'm fortunate that my job allows me the flexibility to do that. And I still like collaborate mostly with other economists, and I still get to work on the topics that I want to work on
Yeah.
and write the types of papers that I want to write.
It seems like
Write.
a Stanford model is just to have economists just everywhere.
There are a lot of us. I know. I don't know if everyone loves that, but there are many of us.
Yeah, it's cool. I mean, it seems like then, there's so many avenues of new ideas to get into the field, by being around so many different, whether it's an OR, whether it's the business school, whether it's the med school. I have
Yeah, no,
I have
absolutely.
I have a paper that and I know I've kept you, but I just wanted we could talk a little bit about it. You have like a bunch of exciting new work on school shootings and intra-family disease spread, but I'm actually really I'm interested in all of them. And if we'd had more time, if I had managed our time better, I would wanted to. But I was really interested in this new ADHD paper with Petra Pearson and is it Zenyao Q? How do I say that?
Yeah, Shinyao.
Shinyao?
Mhm.
For the sake of the listener, can you tell us what this paper is about?
Sure. So this is a paper. It's called Family Spillover Effects of Marginal Diagnoses, the Case of ADHD. And as you said, it's with Petra, who's faculty here at Stanford Economics, and Chinya, who was a PhD student here, and has recently graduated. And so what we do is we start out documenting sort of the well-documented fact that kids who are born right before the school entry cutoff, meaning that they're the youngest for the grade, are much more likely to be diagnosed with ADHD and treated with ADHD medication as compared to kids who are the oldest for the grade, right? And this is a fact that's been documented across so many different settings, across so many different contexts. We do it using Swedish data. So
Ah,
we do it in the context of Sweden using sort of the rich population level administrative data. So we document that fact, and it's a pretty
what's
big
it look
gap.
like in the data, Maya? Is it like really sharp or is it kind of growing? Like, is it kind of
It's
growing as you
quite
get?
sharp. I think it was like a
Oh,
17% differences, but don't quote me on that. I don't have the paper in
at
front
the
of me.
like
But
right at the being the youngest in your
yeah,
grade and the oldest.
discontinuity. Exactly. So if you do like an RD using date of birth, their cutoff is January 1st. So it's sort of very
Mm,
straightforward. So kids who are born like December 31st as compared to kids who are born January 1st or 2nd, there's a pretty big gap in both diagnoses and prescription medication for the
mm,
ADHD.
mm.
But then what was sort of really surprising to us is that we then looked at, so in the Swedish data, you can match families in a pretty big way, right? So we're
Oh,
essentially
that's
able to
brilliant.
identify first cousins. So we
Oh,
look
wait, say it
at
again. You're doing what? You're
first,
doing
first
first.
cousins.
Oh,
So not siblings, cousins, right? So we look at cousins. So the parents are siblings, right? And then they have kids, and those kids are first cousins. And basically what you do, so the sort of the way to explain the paper is like the same x-axis, right? Which is date of birth of a child, right? But now instead of plotting ADHD diagnosis and ADHD drug prescription rates of that own child, we look at their younger cousin.
why do
And
you
you
go to the
still get this
cousin? Why are you not going to the brother and the sister? Why are you going to the cousin?
great question. Because there's also literature that shows there's sort of like all kinds of things that change within a nuclear household when your child is the youngest for a grade versus an oldest for a grade.
Oh, got it.
There's like role model effects, like mothers are less likely to be employed. So there's
Uh-huh.
like all kinds of stuff that happens in the nuclear household that could affect the sibling in a variety of different ways, right?
Mm,
we kind of shut that down when we look at cousins, because at least in Sweden, like it's very rare, almost never happens that cousins live in the same household, right? So we're looking at cousins just to kind of shut down other channels through which an older child being young for grade versus
Yep.
old for grade could affect, people in their family. So looking at cousins, what you see is that this discontinuity exists for cousins,
That's
meaning
crazy.
that conditional on like the cousin's own age for grade,
Yeah.
right? We still see that if they have a older cousin who is youngest for grade,
It's got to be an older cousin.
they're more likely to be ADHD diagnosed and treated.
It's got to be an older cousin.
We see it both ways, but there's like we actually looked at the timing. So it's like whoever's the first cousin to kind of be diagnosed, it spills over on whoever's the second cousin.
So
And so
what?
mostly
You're
we focus on
getting
older
a
versus younger.
diagnosis? Are you getting prescriptions also, stimulants?
Yeah, prescriptions as well, both
Oh.
diagnoses and prescriptions.
Well, so what all are you looking at as an outcome? Are you looking at schooling as an outcome and stuff?
Yeah, so there's kind of two parts of the paper. First is just really documenting the spillover effect,
Yep.
which we're kind of thinking about the different channels driving that.
How
And
many
in the
channels are
context,
there? How many channels are there?
yes,
Not just information?
yeah, so we think primarily in our context where these cousins are unlikely to be like attending the same schools,
Right.
it would be like information, like literally parents talking to each other, like the sibling parents talking to each other and saying, hey, my
Totally.
kid, might have ADHD. And because ADHD has a genetic component, right? And so when they so basically we see it as like these younger cousins are being kind of systematically over referred to evaluation for ADHD, but
Mhm.
then physicians kind of don't undo that in the sense that they don't ask like, is your older cousin young for grade or old for grade, right?
Yeah.
So they kind of, because part of the ADHD protocol is you take into account family information, family history, including cousins.
Hmm. Hey,
Um,
Maya, is it
yeah.
possible that the young kids are getting diagnosed correctly and the old kids, the control group, is getting underdiagnosed? I mean,
Yeah, no, so
I mean, you
exactly.
have an
So
opinion, but is it what is it?
yeah, we actually don't take a strong stance on this, right? It could be that like we don't take a strong stance on like whether it means that the young for age kids are systematically
Yeah.
overdiagnosed or the old for grade kids are systematically underdiagnosed. We're just sort of saying that there's some kind of misalignment happening here. And then that spills over to other family members, such as the
Does it
cousins.
does it does it do something though? Like if you're
We look
under,
at long-term outcomes, right? So if we thought that there were sort of really big benefits of, let's say, ADHD diagnoses or medication for ADHD on things like educational attainment, earnings, then you would then maybe see effects on those outcomes. Now, so basically what we do is we look at how does earnings of the younger cousin vary as a function of their older cousin's age for grade,
Hmm.
holding constant their own age for grade, right? So we're taking out all of the kind of channels through which your own age for grade affects those outcomes.
Mhm.
But your cousin's age for grade, it's hard to think of other ways in which that matters besides this ADHD spillover mechanism. There could
Gotta
be,
be
and this
the
is why.
overdrive. So it need it. I can't quite see it in my head, but are you saying because for the cousin, it's more likely to be the overdiagnosis?
Well, it's something about sort of this additional kind of extra diagnoses that are happening.
That's what.
And if we thought that they were correcting for underdiagnosis, right? So they're that like truly like these are folks that are benefiting from getting these diagnoses, then we might see better
Got
long-term
it.
outcomes.
Yeah. Right. That's almost a way to kind of tease it out a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
we don't,
yeah.
so the bottom line is we don't. We mostly see null effects. There's somewhat
Even though they're
imprecise.
getting diagnosed,
Yeah.
all these people are getting diagnosed, and they're getting like stimulants or something. But then the educational outcomes are more or less nothing.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So we're not seeing a whole lot happening on
So
either
what do you think that
educational.
means? How do you interpret all
I
that?
mean, the way that we interpret it is these are marginal diagnoses, right? So these are sort of diagnoses that maybe wouldn't have happened in the absence of this kind of family spillover channel,
Mm,
and where, there's just not a whole lot of benefit resulting from obtaining this diagnosis. So we're not saying anything about like overall in the population, should we be diagnosing ADHD or not, but it's these marginal diagnoses that we're kind of identifying that spill over in the family that seem
yeah,
to not be having much of an impact on these
yeah, yeah,
hormones.
yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because in those other papers, I've seen them, the channels by which that discontinuity would lead to the overdiagnosis kind of thought to be the teachers, right? It's like how they're interacting in class, and maybe
Mhm.
the parents too, but it's something about the peers, the relative
Mhm.
performance of the peers. Here, it's like there might not even be something like that because they're not being
Well, that
compared to
might be going on for the original child, right? Like
the
the first
original one.
cousin. Yeah, but then the spillover happens, I think, through more of a family like
Mm,
information
that's
mechanism.
cool. Wow. Well, you're working on a ton of really cool stuff. These the school shooting paper and those are uh very timely and important. And so I've kept you over 15 minutes from what I had promised. Uh I guess I'd like to end, you think about some kid who's you know, they're now at maybe not Berkeley, but they're like at some school and they're graduating and they're thinking about different things they want to do with their life. You know, what do you think is something that they might not even have the capacity because of just their age and everything to sort of know about econ? Not that you want to like necessarily dictate what they do with their life, but there's some missing information that they have. What's something that you think is kind of really important that you sort of think that people would really like to have, should have?
Yeah, that's a big question. Um, I guess a couple things. One is that, yeah, just the breadth of economics and how you can really, there's so many interesting different topics that people are interested in. I mean, you yourself do a lot of stuff related to like mental health and things like that. Um, you know, Maybe to somebody outside the econ world, they wouldn't have necessarily thought economists work on mental health, right? So there's just so many different topics that one could use economics to really study and understand and kind of make some kind of progress on.
Yeah.
And so that's a big one, and that's again not something I initially realized, right? Like even when I
Mhm.
first entered economics in college. The second thing I say is like, I guess I think we have some like preconceived notions about, or at least I did probably, about like what different types of careers look like. I remember when I went to grad school, I was like, oh, I'm not sure if I want to have an academic career. Like, I really
Mm,
want to make impact. I want to do policy, um, and be closer to like the real world kind of thing. And I mean, it's obviously like selection bias in terms of who ends up where and then what do they think about it. But I guess looking back now, I feel pretty happy about the sort of where I ended up by virtue of both choice and, of course, a lot of luck as well, and all the people that helped along the way.
mhm,
Um, and I love the freedom that I have to work on questions and topics that I want to. I love the freedom to choose my co-authors and who I work with, and how fun that process is, and how collaborative actually research is. That's also something that I didn't really understand. Like I thought you just kind of sit on your own, like in front of a computer in your head.
mm,
But really, so much of research is really collaborative, which I find really fun and exciting and
mm,
engaging. And so it's sort of the world of economics is a lot wider and arguably more fun than you might realize.
mm,
We have our problems for sure. And there's a lot of discussion of that, of course. But I think I'm overall feel quite fortunate
yeah.
that sort of this is the career I've landed
Yeah.
in.
Yeah, I was just thinking as you said that actually, and then thinking about you do have like your modal paper might have three. I don't know, maybe that's not true, but you have a bunch of three people papers. And I was just thinking about you saying, uh, you left your family and then you wanted to stay with your family kind of close, and then you really loved the newspaper. It just seems like is it correct that that econ does have a little bit of the kind of camaraderie that you've liked in your life?
I think so. I think so. I think there's a lot of really nice camaraderie in this profession, and I think there's a lot of really great people. Again, like I think we sometimes talk about the big issues and the big challenges the profession faces, which I definitely think it does. But there's a lot of really, really wonderful people that I've met through this profession that I've gotten a chance to work with, that I've been mentored by, and I've gotten a chance to mentor now that
Mhm.
that I've been in it for a while. And so I think like with anything, it's really the people that make it worthwhile.
Yeah,
Um, and so that means something to me.
cool. Well, it's so nice to meet again and talk for an extended period of time, and I really appreciate you telling me about your life and telling me about all the things you're working on.
Thank you, Scott. It was a real pleasure. It was a very different type of interview than what I've ever done, but it was very fun.
Cool, cool. Well, you have a good day.
You too. Take care.
Till it breaks. She hated when I called.